Good morning and welcome to the Camilla Tominey show here on GB News. It's been another busy week in Westminster and indeed the markets as Rachel Reeves travelled to China. I'm going to be joined by the Secretary of State for Science, Technology and Innovation, Peter Kyle. I'll ask him whether it was right for the Chancellor to cosy up to one of our biggest foes while the economy here at home has been tanking. Shadow Chancellor of Exchequer Mel Stride will be joining us. We'll be discussing the economy and a new poll which puts reform well ahead of the Tories. Is that a source of concern to Mel Stride? And former Chancellor of the Exchequer Kwasi Kwarteng will be here. I'll be asking him why what's been going on with the economy is any worse than Liz Truss's mini-budget of 2022. Lord Walney, the government's independent advisor on political violence and disruption, will be with me to discuss the latest on the Grooming gang's child rape scandal and why Labour is still blocking a national inquiry. And we'll be looking ahead to President-elect Trump's upcoming inauguration and also reflecting on the devastating wildfires in Los Angeles with Jennifer Ewing of the Republican Overseas Group. Another 90 minutes of punchy British politics lies ahead. Don't go anywhere. But first, let's delve now into the Sunday papers with former Conservative Special Advisor James Price, who joins me this morning. James, lovely to see you.
Good morning.
Right, great story on the front of the Mail on Sunday by the political editor Glenn Owen and his deputy, Anna Mikhailova. Musk and Cummings in plot to sabotage UK politics. So this is the suggestion that behind every Elon Musk tweet is Dominic Cummings, formerly, or best known perhaps, as Boris Johnson's closest advisor, known before that as the chairman of Vote Leave. What do we think?
I mean, it's just a fantastic headline, isn't it, to get started? All the kind of major characters in every news story, a great plot twist, bringing back an old fan favourite in Dominic Cummings. You know, this is the guy who masterminded the Brexit campaign. He masterminded Boris Johnson's massive election victory in 2019 and then had that rather infamous falling out with Boris after the even more infamous trip up to Barnard Castle.
Yes.
Now, I happen to think that Dom Cummings is probably the smartest person in British politics. I think he's right about every major problem and failing in the British state, and I think he's also right about all the ways that you need to fix it, which incidentally were kind of the opposite of all of the things that this newish Labour government are trying to do. And Elon Musk is clearly one of the smartest, most successful, impressive people in the world as well. So the two of them getting together, you would like to think would yield some amazing results, but as we know, they're quite volatile figures.
Yes.
Will they be able to get along long enough to save Western civilization? Let's find out.
It strikes me as perhaps a meeting of two loose cannons, and I think when you get two loose cannons together, all you end up with is an explosion. And I agree with you with regard to Cummings' genius in ideas. Didn't quite manage to apply that to actual government.
It was tricky, wasn't it? I mean, I worked inside government when Dominic Cummings was the top advisor, as you say, and he was right about everything. And if he'd have, had kind of extreme executive authority, if he'd have been Lord Protector like Oliver Cromwell or something, you'd see a much more efficiently running British state. But unfortunately, the state of the state is in such a pickle at the moment, and it's getting worse and worse every week that we've got this current government in, that it's a big, tall order, and it's going to take literal rocket science, perhaps in the form of Elon Musk, to help try and fix the deep problems that you've got inside both the British government and the American government as well.
It would explain, wouldn't it, if Cummings is behind the scenes when it comes to Elon Musk tweeting, particularly in the middle of the night. Like there's this sense that he's tweeting on British time and could somebody be tweeting for him or whatever, when it came to that criticism of Nigel Farage and saying, oh, Nigel Farage shouldn't be running reform over a disagreement over the involvement in reform of Tommy Robinson. And then you think, God, there's no love lost between Dominic Cummings and Nigel Farage.
Yeah, that would be the really sort of 4D chess going on here from Dominic Cummings in there, doesn't it just? But this is the idea. Reform, as you mentioned there's a poll app that they're doing very well. Dominic Cummings has been talking for a long time about a potential start-up party in the UK as well. That sounds like it would be up Elon Musk's street even more than perhaps reform. So it's, I think, a long way to go into the next election. You can't count out the Tories to make a comeback as well, although the difficulty that my party has got is the fact that for everything they now say, reform or Elon Musk or Dominic Cummings or others will all go and say, you had 14 years, why didn't you fix it? And it's a fair challenge. I think there are structural reasons for it, but
they seem to be having more cut through as well, those figures, than Kemi Badenoch right now. Should we move on to Labour?
Oh, that's...
It's not been a great week, has it, for Rachel Reeves? So much coverage in the paper today. Tim Shipman's written a piece saying, crisis, yes, it's still a growth crisis, talking about Callaghan's famous words, crisis, what crisis, and being blind to the idea of the economy tanking in the 1970s. We've now got Rachel Reeves over in China. I mean, she's claiming that she's made £600 million worth of trade deals, all well and good. But it's starting to make the mini budget look like a picnic, isn't it, this?
Yeah, I mean, it's extraordinary. Again, Labour have had so much time in opposition to try and work out what's wrong with the economy and what they could go and do to make it better. And everything they've done is make it worse. Let's not forget that budget that Rachel Reeves said, she made a big song and dance about economic growth. And that's really important because as costs go up and more Brits get older, you need economic growth to create more money to pay for the schools and the hospitals and the roads and the army and all these very important things. As the world gets more dangerous, I think we need to spend a lot more on defence, and that's not happening under this government. So she talked a big song and dance at the budget. This was going to be a budget for growth. And what's the outcome? Growth is going to be even lower.
Yes.
Before the 2008 big financial crash, by some metrics, Brits were a little bit richer in terms of their what you call purchasing power parity than Americans were. Now Americans are about 60% richer than we are, and their poorest state, Mississippi, people there are better off than they are in the UK. That's how stark it is, because the Americans actually prioritised economic growth, and here we've prioritised rules and regulations and more things that will cut off that kind of growth, and that's why we all feel poorer.
But don't worry, because according to the front page of the Sunday Telegraph, Reeves is to wage a war on waste. So why is it whenever a politician is in trouble, they start saying, right, I'm going to wage a war on waste? How many wars on waste have been waged in the past by successive governments only for the state to continue to be hugely wasteful? The jury's out on that one. You mentioned America earlier. Should we talk about these wildfires, which are kind of, I mean, there is an irony to this unfolding in the Hollywood Hills when it actually does resemble a sort of James Cameron-esque disaster movie. We've obviously focused a lot on the celebrities that have been affected, and some of the stars that have lost their homes include James Woods and Mel Gibson, Paris Hilton and others. But now serious questions being asked by people of all political persuasions, by the way, of why Los Angeles was so ill prepared for this. Fire hydrants running dry. I mean, these communities are on the Pacific coast and they don't have enough water. Donald Trump saying that Gavin Newsom, or Newscum, I think he calls him, is to blame. What's your view on it?
Well, Trump said all of this in the long-form interview he had on the famous Joe Rogan podcast just before the election. He spent 7 or 8 minutes ranting and raging about how California was having water shortages. And everyone said, oh, God, Trump's on one again. He's an idiot. He doesn't know what he's talking about. Been proven right yet again. It's extraordinary. And a lot of it is stupid kind of woke ideas that you can't go and clear up all the kind of underbrush in these woods because of the lesser spotted newt or whatever it may be. And there are different kinds of little endangered fish species that you can't go and affect because they're more important than what turns out to be people's lives. So all these sorts of mad rules have come into play. Bear in mind that California, if it were a country on its own, would be the 4th or 5th richest country in the world. And yet they haven't got the money to go and have adequate fire protections. And what they do spend all their time doing is what the Americans will call DEI, diversity, equity and inclusion policies.
Because that saves people when there's a fire raging around them.
Honestly, Camilla, there is one video of a firefighter and she's talking about how it's true that I wouldn't be able to carry somebody out of a burning building, but my response to that, she says, is that he got himself in there in the first place and that's his fault. It's hardly what you want to hear from a firefighter.
What did Elon Musk say about DEI has turned into DIE?
Exactly right.
What should we say about Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass? Because there was this extraordinary exchange between her and a British journalist in the week. She had been on a junket to Ghana while all this was happening. She flies back and then he says to her, you know, what do you have to say for people whose homes are in flames? Why did you cut nearly $20 million from the fire budget? Should you resign? Her reaction is astonishing, isn't it?
She says not a single word. You know, is one thing you can trust a politician to do at the very least, you know, restore factory settings, it's be able to speak. You'll be seeing this over the next 90 minutes of your show. It's the one thing all politicians definitely can do, and she's not able to answer. I think someone described it, a big kind of tech bro in California described it as the single worst example of political leadership they had ever seen. And it's true. And this is what happens. I think you have somewhere like California, the highest living standards in the history of mankind, you know, unbelievable wealth that you could never imagine. You know, you click a button and a drone flies in and then brings you anything on earth. And yet they suffer these kinds of horrendous attacks now. And it happened a few years ago as well. They've learned nothing from it. And I think, although you may call me a stereotype for even saying this, that it is so much of this woke mind virus that's causing it. And these are, I'm afraid, the very sad consequences of that.
Well, also, there was the piece in the week suggesting that Newsom had cut $150 million from the fire budget, but had preserved 90% of the climate change budget. Now, that's interesting because quite a few people, particularly of a Democrat persuasion, have tried to suggest this is in some way linked to climate change. Ross Clark wrote a really interesting piece in The Spectator in the week saying, no, it's nothing to do with climate change. In fact, quite the opposite is true. There are far fewer wildfires in Los Angeles than there were 100 years ago. Less acreage is being burned. Deadwood then builds up, and it means that the fires are even more catastrophic. Trump had also spoken about controlled fires of deadwood and had been ridiculed and called an arsonist.
Right, it's exactly that. And this is just all these various state governments, if they've got blue governors in them, if they've got Democratic left-wing governors in there, these are the kind of things that happen. And across the rest of California, they've spent something like $50 billion on a high-speed rail network. Not a single foot of track has actually been laid yet.
No, that sounds familiar, James.
Right, quite. They've spent billions as well on ending homelessness, and homelessness is worse than ever. In fact, the only way they got rid of it in San Francisco was locking all the homeless people up when Chinese President Xi Jinping came in, because they can do it for a Chinese dictator, but not for their own people. This is what happens when you elect terrible politicians. We've done it here 6 months ago in the UK, and we're seeing it here as well. We've got to expect better from our politicians and hold them to account when they keep failing us.
All right, I'll get Peter Carl to defend himself against that claim in just a moment. Let's just have a quick word for the brain surgeon who has been fighting the inferno in his downtime. It's a story in the Sunday Telegraph about this bloke and his son who prepared for this, who didn't have confidence in the authorities, who stored up water and got fire hoses in, and has basically, for the past 5 days, been defending his home, not just from fires, but also from looters. What a legend. This guy's a hero.
Well, they should elect him, right?
Yes,
right?
exactly.
You can save one brain at a time in the surgery room, or you can save the whole state of California. It is an amazing story. And all these guys, I mean, in America, it's particularly prevalent that you get these kind of doomsday preppers, of which I'm sure there are examples here in the UK as well. My old man stores Frey Bento's pies in the garage in case the revolution ever comes. But the fact that this guy did it, and on Monday morning he was back to doing brain surgery again,
I know.
It's extraordinary.
If Trump's got any sense at all, he will offer this guy some kind of position alongside Elon Musk on government efficiencies. Final story, James. I just picked this out because I thought it was me going mad and also getting old. That whenever I drive around at night these days, and my eyesight isn't brilliant and I wear contact lenses and all the rest of it, but I have really found myself struggling against other cars' headlights. I genuinely put it down to being on the wrong side of 40. We now read that we do have a problem, a legitimate problem with headlights being too bright, because there used to be conventional bulbs, now they're LEDs. Sorry to be technical about it, but apparently bulbs should be at around 10,000 lumens. But some cars are installing bulbs in their headlights that are 35,000. Have you experienced this? I'm not alone in this, I don't think.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, it is a bright idea that we finally got to the bottom of all this. As you say, you can go onto websites now and buy these light bulbs and install them yourselves. And it was bad enough when people were installing silly neon lights underneath the car, but this is actually getting quite dangerous now, and it's resulting in collisions and accidents and things because people can't see at night. And maybe part of it as well is the fact that cars are supposed to now have automatic headlight dips as well.
Yeah, and they don't always
work.
And also, I think a lot of cars now are SUVs, so they're slightly higher. So if you're in a little car like mine, I drive a Mini, literally blinded wherever I drive anywhere. That combined with potholes doesn't make for an easy time for the motorists. Let's not even get on to 20-mile-an-hour zones and low traffic neighbourhoods. James, that's for another day. Thank you very much for joining me this morning. Great to hear your views on the stories of Sunday. Well, coming up next, I'm going to be speaking to Peter Carl, who is the Science and Technology Secretary of State, and I'll also be speaking to Mel Stride, who's the Shadow Chancellor. He can have a word or two about Rachel Reeves disappearing to China, and we'll speak to Kwasi Kwarteng, who, let's be honest, knows a little bit about being in trouble as a Chancellor. What does he think about the idea that Rachel Reeves might have to resign? I'll be back in just a jiffy.
I hope it doesn't rain.
Don't worry about it.
It'll spoil our holiday.
Relax, we're totally covered.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast. If you're about to jet off to the Mediterranean for some winter sun, then west is certainly best at this time. It's high pressure that's in charge across parts of Iberia into southern France to provide relatively fine conditions at the moment, but further towards Italy and around the Adriatic towards Turkey as well, we've currently got some heavy rain, even heavy snowfall across inland areas. This will be continuing over the next couple of days or so, but is expected to ease during the forthcoming week.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations Forecast.
Mornings don't have to be tiresome, especially if you have the right company.
Wake up to news as it happens, opinion and debate, and of course, a little bit of entertainment too.
Because when the kettle's on, we're on.
That's Breakfast on GB News, a show worth waking up for.
Every morning from 6 a.m.
Only on the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We'll spread the news, you spread the word.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Lauren, let's start with this, shall we? How children's TV may be harming, not helping young minds.
Yeah, so this is an article in the Express today, a big double-page spread as a result of some new research in a new book that's coming out by a child psychologist, saying that children's television, and I think perhaps more importantly, the way that children consume television and video product now is perhaps not as healthy for them as we would hope it would be. And there's quite some distance from children's television of the past, of the sort of the Bagpuss and Clangers and Ivor the Engine era. And I think what's interesting about this is particularly the how children's television is consumed angle, because children are now put in front of screens significantly more often than they were, certainly when I think we were growing up. The content that they are consuming is not great for their brains and their learning and development, which Floella Benjamin of children's television fame is now leading a big crusade to say that some of this is really, really bad for children.
These days, they're not watching the TV that we all watched when we were growing up. They're not even watching GB News in the morning.
What are they thinking?
Would you believe it? But they are watching this absolute drivel all day long on YouTube, and because obviously all our TVs are now connected to the internet, or they're getting TikTok on their TV. It's not even, so they don't even necessarily have to have smartphones or iPads. They can just watch this stuff on TV, and it is rubbish. They are watching it and they're obsessed with it. Oh God, Skibbity Toilet or something. Have you heard of this?
No.
No? Well, you'll have viewers who have got who are parents of sort of 13-year-olds, and this Skibbity Toilet thing is, they're all obsessed with it, and this is a really annoying sort of theme tune or thing that they sing at you.
GB News, the People's Channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial. And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born. It's everything you need to kickstart your evening. Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it. That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm joined now by the Secretary of State for Science, Innovation and Technology, Peter Kyle. Thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning, Mr. Kyle. You're announcing this week a new crack team of AI expertise focused on strengthening the UK's sovereign AI capabilities and supporting national champions to create the leading AI powers of tomorrow. Cheeky question, Mr. Kyle, but considering Labour's recent performance, might it be time for AI politicians?
Oh, honestly, that is a very cheeky question to start off with. No, what we're doing is looking at what has made Silicon Valley so powerful, to create so much wealth for businesses, to get innovation that emerges and then suddenly gets upscaled to become not just a national impact in America, but global impact too. Now, I think that we have all of those parts here. We've got the skills, the universities, we have the investors. You know, we have all of the things in play there, but they're not in place and coordinated. Now, AI AI and digital technology is going to transform the global economy. Does Britain want to sit on the sidelines and buy off the shelf as this technology emerges? Or do we want to be part of developing it, designing it, creating the wealth and the jobs and the opportunities that come with it, and not just create countrywide companies, but global companies that are the scale that we've seen elsewhere? We have that potential, but at the moment, we're not actually trying to and striving towards it. With this new unit that we're going to set up, that will report directly to the Prime Minister and myself, we're taking those first crucial steps.
But obviously, to take these first crucial steps, we have to have a strong economy. You have to agree that this week has been rather dire for the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves. In what way is Labour any different from Liz Truss and her own mini-budget when it comes to borrowing costs now? They're the highest level they have been for 27 years. So isn't Rachel Reeves guilty, in Labour parlance, of, quotes, crashing the economy?
Well, every householder will know the difference. That letter that Liz Truss wrote to the Prime Minister asking for an apology should have been a letter that she wrote to every mortgage holder and householder in this country, apologising for what she did. When you've seen what's happened and the trends over the last week, they are mimicked by what's happening in the US and elsewhere. We are in line. What Liz Truss did was unique to our country here. Now, our plan for change, of course, involves fixing the fundamentals of the economy, which is what we saw in the budget. But we've crucially, if we're going to break this desperate cycle that we'd inherited of high taxes and low growth, we have to start investing in the industries of the future. We're doing that by house building. We're doing that by investing in the energy sector for the future. And we are doing it now with the digital infrastructure, because digital infrastructure into the future will sit alongside electricity and water as the crucial vehicles for keeping people and our economy safe, keeping people and our economy growing.
The UK economy is flatlining. The Labour Party came into power promising growth. We've seen no growth. There's now worries among investors and others that interest rates might actually have to go up. We're entering a period of stagflation. This is absolutely not what Rachel Reeves promised when Labour was campaigning to win power. We're 6 months into this premiership, and it's been disastrous economically. You've got the public paying higher taxes. We've now got the threat that mortgages might go up by £1,000 under Rachel Reeves. So this is no different at all, is it, to the catastrophe that was Liz Truss's premiership?
You're basing what you've just said on Q3 figures, which were entirely the legacy of the previous administration. What you've illustrated is precisely what we are determined to break. Now, what Rachel Reeves did in that budget was a budget for the future. It was a budget that fixed the foundations. Now, we have also invested. We are investing in those high growth sectors of digital, AI, health, technology, climate technology, which we can then develop and sell around the world. And we have increased our R&D budget as a country by 8.5%. We are laying the foundations for growth in the key areas of our economy that aren't just rooted in the past, but will create sustainable jobs into the future, exciting jobs into the future. And just bear in mind that tomorrow, when we launch and the Prime Minister launches the AI Action Plan, it will have a whole raft of measures that will get our country facing the future. And the investment you see in things like data centres, these aren't distant things. These are factories for AI that will create engineering jobs. They will create construction jobs. They will create the jobs that kids are currently in school for and at university for, that they will come out and be able to stay in our country rather than having to go to other countries to make the best use of their skills. This is a patriotic platform that is investing in our country and will get growth.
Do you mean countries like China, which for years have been competing with our own technological industries? Why on earth did the Chancellor decide, of all places, to go to China when you're trying to promote homegrown digital technologies and the economy is tanking? Why did she decide to go to China now? It was completely inappropriate, wasn't it?
China is our fourth largest trading partner. China is an unignorable force on the world stage. So why on earth were the Tories imploring us to ignore them? We went over there, we engaged, we will engage on trade, and yes, we also discussed human rights issues. This is what it puts our national interest first. You know, you do not deliver our national interest and also more investment into our country by sitting on the sidelines, which is what the Conservatives are imploring us to do. Yes, skills are leaving our country. A lot of them are going to America for the jobs that we are now striving to create. This is the thing that will create the wealth of the future. This is the thing that will get our country fit for the future and also have sustainable economic growth into the future.
I'm glad you mentioned the national interest. We've now got a survey suggesting that 3 in 4 Britons want a public inquiry into the grooming child rape scandal. So why is Labour resisting that inquiry? Because clearly, from that survey, it's in the public interest.
The voices that matter most are the voices that you did not mention in that question, and they are the voices of the victims themselves.
I'm just going to stop you there, Mr. Kyle, because I spoke to a survivor this week called Gaia Cooper. She's also been accompanied by another survivor called Elizabeth Harper. Both of them have called for a public inquiry.
The victims community, as the Prime Minister, who also met with victims this week and also delivered prosecutions against those gangs 12 years ago.
But
and
they
some
want
of
a
those
public
prosecutions
inquiry.
Are still... Yeah, but they've had 7 public inquiries, and listen, we are listening to the victims community. They at the moment are split, but what they all want is action. Now, the first page of the J Review, which took 7 years and costs £200 million, said that one of the key challenges was the lack of multi-agency cooperation. Now, the bill that we introduced into Parliament this week, the Child Welfare Bill, had as its central commitment multi-agency cooperation for fact. We would deliver it, and the Conservatives tried to stop it. Now, we didn't just introduce this on the back of a national debate that's happened in the last fortnight. We planned this bill in opposition. We have been drafting it in government.
Mr. Kyle,
we implemented it last week. There are things we are doing and actions we're taking, and we will continue to do so and deliver for those victims.
All right, Peter Kyle, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning. Still a lot more to come on the Camilla Tominey show today, including Mel Stride, the Shadow Chancellor of Rijeka, and Kwasi Kwarteng. Don't go anywhere, stay tuned, lots more to come.
Don't miss your chance to win our biggest cash prize ever, an incredible £50,000. That's tax-free cash to spend on anything you like this year. What would you spend it on? £50,000 could buy those treats you've always dreamed of having. And just one entry into the Great British Giveaway really could make £50,000 cash all yours. For another chance to win, text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. Go to gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2. You can call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Or post your name and number to GB10 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 31st of January. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
We've got a special treat for you because we can show you this lovely video of a lady running on a beach. So you're not missing much if you're listening on the radio. It is literally a woman in white writing on the beach, writing 2025.
Yes, because that's the year we're in now.
Is it?
Yes,
Wow.
and it's because Meghan Markle returned to Instagram yesterday.
Former royal correspondent for The Sun, Charles Ray, joins us now. Are you inspired to remember the year, Charles?
Oh, Happy New Year to you too as well. I honestly haven't got a clue what she's doing now. You know, I would have thought we should have had the theme tune from Jaws as she was running down to the water there and everything else. They're being quite hypocritical here because they came off social media because they were getting unparalleled abuse. I don't condone at all. It is not right whatsoever. And they've spent the last few years complaining about social media.
We've seen her before with her lifestyle blog, haven't we? Before she met Prince Harry, she was running a successful blog. Do you think she wants to go back to doing that sort of thing?
I think it's possible that that's what she wants to do. I mean, I don't understand how these things work, okay? But all I know is that certain influencers earn an awful lot of money from Instagram and everything else. Now, they're talking about figures. I mean, whether this is true or not, I've something like £790,000 she could earn per post. You know, so it's quite incredible what she can possibly earn out of this. It's interesting, though, Stephen and Ellie, that she's actually switched off all the comments on this one.
I noticed that.
Clearly, she doesn't want to have anybody on there saying anything nasty or anything good about it.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show, only on GB News. Still lots more to come on the show today. We've got Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, Mel Stride, and former Tory Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng to reflect on what's been a very turbulent week for the economy. Lord Walney will also be here to discuss that vote against a national inquiry into grooming gangs. Just discussed it with Peter Carl. Still haven't got an answer on whether it would be in the national interest. And we're going to look ahead to the upcoming Trump inauguration with Jennifer Ewing. But before all that, here's the news headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Camilla, thank you. The top stories. Reform UK leader Nigel Farage has accused the Health Secretary of attempting to conceal the reality of the grooming gangs after he claimed the public discourse could risk vilifying certain communities. Wes Streeting had said the rhetoric around grooming gangs risked causing a second New Zealand mosque massacre. Mr Farage told The Telegraph that Mr Streeting's remarks were insulting. That's now as Labour MP Dan Carden has broken ranks from Sir Keir Starmer, joining Andy Burnham in his calls for a national inquiry into the scandal. Fury over grooming gangs has reignited in recent weeks after Labour blocked a national inquiry backed by Kemi Badenoch and tech billionaire Elon Musk. In other news, the UK Health Security Agency has extended its cold weather health alert for all of England until Tuesday. Amber alerts will now run until January the 14th, meaning a rise in deaths, particularly among those aged 65 and over or with health conditions, is likely, the agency says. Overnight temperatures hit -15 in some areas. Now, the Los Angeles fires are raging on as the death toll now reaches 16, with the blame directed at celebrity residents who broke water-saving rules to tend their lavish gardens. More than 100,000 people are under evacuation orders. Looters are also a persistent thorn in the side of the authorities, with criminals even dressing as firefighters in order to steal from evacuated homes. Malibu has lost 1/3 of its eastern edge, according to the city's mayor. Gusty winds are forecast for the coming days, potentially further fuelling the fires. And a North Yorkshire police officer has died after she was struck by a lorry as she was helping at the scene of an earlier road accident. The Mayor of York and North Yorkshire and Deputy Mayor of Policing, Fire and Crime said their hearts are broken. PC Rosie Pryor was standing on the verge of the A19 at Bagby near Thirsk with the driver and passenger of one of the cars involved when the lorry collided with them yesterday morning. Miss Pryor and 41-year-old Ryan Welford from Knaresborough, who'd been involved in the first collision, both died at the scene. The 65-year-old lorry driver was arrested on suspicion of causing death by dangerous driving and has been released under investigation. Also, a teenage boy who was a passenger in Mr Welford's car is in a serious but stable condition. Those are the latest GB News headlines. For now, it's back to Camilla.
Thank you very much, Tatiana, and welcome back. Former Chancellor of the Exchequer, Kwasi Kwarteng, will be here in the studio shortly. I'll be asking him whether what's been happening with the economy this week is any worse than Liz Truss's mini-budget of 2022. But I'm also going to be speaking to the government advisor on political violence and disruption, Lord Walney. He'll be here to discuss the Muslim grooming grooming gang scandal. And we'll also be speaking about the upcoming inauguration of President-elect Trump and reflecting on those devastating wildfires in Los Angeles with Republican overseas spokesman Jennifer Ewing. But before that, I'm now joined by the Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, Mel Stride. Mr. Stride, lovely to speak to you this morning. I've just spoken to Peter Kyle, the Science and Technology Minister, who is basically saying that a lot of the figures that the Tories are now attacking Labour for on the economy are from Q3. So a lot of this calamity happened under the Tories. I mean, to what extent must you admit as Shadow Chancellor your fault in the problems that the economy is suffering from today?
Well, I think Peter, when he's referring to Q3, is probably focusing on growth. At the point that we handed the economy over to this government, we had the highest growth rate in the G7. We had near record level of employment. We had a near record low level of unemployment. We had seen real wages rising for each of 13 consecutive months. And of course, we had also brought inflation down from its peak back at the end of 2022 of over 11%, down exactly to target at 2% on the day of the general election. Now, that's a pretty good inheritance. And what this government has done is, through telling the electorate ahead of the election they wouldn't be putting up taxes left, right and centre and splurging on the spending side and borrowing lots of money, by doing exactly the opposite, they have killed that growth stone dead. And that's partly why we are seeing the kind of reaction in the bond markets at the moment that is further heaping the pressure on the UK economy, because the more bond yields increase, the more we're having to pay for the servicing costs of our national debt. And that's money that's not, Camilla, going on funding public services or the things that people thought this Labour government were going to be about. It's simply servicing debt that is growing as a consequence of this government.
Although, are the Tories in a credible place to criticise Labour, not only when it comes to what happened after the mini-budget, which was obviously disastrous for the economy and also saw borrowing costs skyrocket? Because actually, when you look back at the Tory party's history in office, actual managed expenditure as a percentage of GDP wasn't really that much different under the Tories than it was under Gordon Brown. In fact, obviously, COVID happened. We then see total managed expenditure up to 53%. I mean, generally, you have borrowed as much as Labour governments. You've also spent as much of Labour governments. The public look at this and think there's no difference between Labour or Tories on overspending and big state.
Well, there were big pressures on spending, obviously, because we had COVID, and that meant we had to support the economy and prevent very high rises of unemployment, and also various cost of living payments to help people through the energy price shock that we got around the Ukraine-Russia war, and that totaled to about £400 billion. And I think there were very few people at the time that was happening anywhere in the political spectrum that were saying we shouldn't have done that. But you just have to look at the OBR forecasts, okay, from the last budget, and this is before all this trouble has kicked off in the economy, showing that under this government, what will be happening going forward is ever higher levels of tax burden and an ever larger state taking up ever greater proportions of UK output. And that is something that is simply unsustainable and lies very much at the root of the problem that we've got at the moment. The animal spirits in the economy have been killed stone dead because of the choices that this Chancellor has made. And I'm afraid the sense is that she just doesn't get this.
I know, but the sense is also that you were responsible for big tax and spend government. The tax burden went up to the highest level since the Second World War under the Conservatives. What are you proposing that she does? Do you think there should be a new era of austerity?
Okay, so
do you think that there should be public sector pay freezes? What's the Tory alternative?
Okay, so it lies in the things that we had in our manifesto, Camilla. So firstly, we would have had an approach to the last budget that would have been leaning into growth rather than dampening growth. So we would have done things differently there. We would not have been taxing the living daylights out of employers up and down this country. Secondly, we would have had a much firmer focus on productivity growth, which is absolutely vital. You saw that in Jeremy Hunt's last budget, 3.4 billion going into the NHS to get productivity productivity up in the National Health Service. Compare that to what this government's done, which is a rush off and give the train drivers 14% and junior doctors 22% pay rises with no productivity gains. The third thing that we went into the election with a clear plan for was how we would get the welfare bill down. Now, I, as Secretary of State at Work and Pensions, had already got £5 billion worth of savings across the next 5 years through welfare reform. And there was more to come, a further 12 billion in fact. Those are very large amounts of money. So if you duck the welfare challenge, you end up heaping the burden on the backs of businesses and working families up and down the country.
I know, but
that's the choice, and that's the choice that this government has ducked.
OK, but hang on a second. When you talk about taxes on businesses, it was the Tories who decided to raise corporation tax by 6%. You shaved 6% off already fragile post-COVID profit margins. What did the Conservatives ever do for business?
So there was the period. In fact, when we first came into office in 2010, the rate of corporation tax was higher and at that level, if not higher, and we still have a competitive rate.
It should have been lower then, shouldn't it?
To the G7. But that apart,
should have gone down.
That apart, there is no doubt that in the face of a pandemic that contracted the UK economy overnight by over 10%, literally within a matter of days, the actions that we had to take then, including supporting families up and down the country in the face of the inflationary spike from the Ukraine war, meant that we had to take the tough decisions to spend in order to support people and businesses at that time.
All right.
I mean, if you remember, Camilla, when we went into just to make this point, when COVID came, a lot of commentators said we are going to see unemployment back up to the levels it was in the early 1980s. It's going to skyrocket. We avoided that, but it came at a cost, and we've had to pay for that by way of, or we had to, some increased taxes.
Yeah.
But as time went on, we were beginning to bring taxes down, and even with the tax threshold freezes that Rishi Sunak brought in, with the national insurance cuts for employees that we were bringing in fact, an average earner was going to be paying a lower rate of marginal tax than at any point since the 1970s. So our direction was in getting taxes down, and that would be what we would be focusing on if we were in government.
Jeremy Hunt's budget wasn't felt to have done that much for business. You know, there was a talking about raising the VAT threshold from a measly 85 grand to 90 grand. People are saying raise it to 150 and stimulate businesses to employ more people. But I digress. When it comes to Rachel Reeves, then, are you calling for her resignation?
I think there are serious questions around the judgments that Rachel Reeves is making.
Are you calling for her to resign?
She is in. Look, those are matters for the Prime Minister, not matters.
Well, are you calling for? You can call for her resignation.
She is
Labour ministers, Labour shadow ministers used to call for heads to roll all the time.
Well, OK, they may or may not have done. That's a matter for the Prime Minister. But I do question the judgments. I've answered that question by saying that is a matter for the Prime Minister.
Yes or no? Should Rachel Reeves resign?
That is my answer to the question, Camilla.
Well, it's not an answer to my question. It's an answer to a question you've posed yourself.
I'm not going to speculate. I'm not going to speculate on the future of the Chancellor.
Why shouldn't she resign?
That the judgment, the judgment that is a matter for the Prime Minister. The judgments that she is making.
You can have an opinion on it.
Are clearly, yes, I do, and I'm telling you what my opinion is, and that is that her judgment
I'm not clear on it. I'm sorry.
Fundamentally flawed.
Apart from your opinion being it's down to the Prime Minister, what do you think? Is this woman competent? Rachel, from accounts, she's being branded. She's over-exaggerated her qualifications on her CV. You're the shadow Chancellor. Is the current Chancellor up to the job?
I think her judgment has been very poor, as I have been setting out and was attempting to go further with. For example, she should not be in China at the moment, talking to the Chinese in the way she is, saying that she's got this £120 million a year additional funding coming into the UK economy, given that the moves in the bond market recently, partly at least, substantially at least, because of the decisions that she's taken, is costing us an estimated estimated £12 billion pounds a year. That's enough to fund 300,000 nurses, for example.
So
no, I think her judgment has been very poor, and very poor judgment around the budget, which is why we are in that situation.
So she's underqualified for the job as far as the Tories are concerned, and her judgment has been poor, but you can't say whether she should be in post or not. Take a position on it. Is she good enough to be Chancellor, or should she resign?
I have taken a position. I have said, look, resignation and things like that of ministers in government are matters for them and for, in this case, the Prime Minister. What I can say categorically is that the judgment that's been exercised in terms of the budget, the current economic predicament that we're in, the fact that she's in China, cap in hand to the Chinese when she should be over here at her station, reassuring the markets about the economy, are clearly matters that are deeply, deeply unsatisfactory.
I don't understand why you, as the opposition, can't say, with all of that in mind, that you don't think she's up to the job and should go. Why can't you just voice a personal opinion on it?
No, I am voicing an opinion, Camilla, and I've said that I think her judgment is deeply flawed. She should not be in China, and she should be here back at her station, reassuring the markets and explaining to us how she and her party, her government, are going to be clawing us out of the mess that she and others in her party, I'm afraid, have got us into. Because this matters to real people up and down the country.
Is she good enough, or is she completely out of her depth?
She is not, as a Chancellor, there is no question that the judgments that she has made have been very poor, OK? So she and her party...
Is she out of her depth?
Going into a budget... I have explained that the judgments that she has made are very poor. And so going into, for example, a budget and layering up taxes on businesses and destroying growth, and then when the bond markets start to go the wrong way, a great cost to our country, to then go off to China, shows a distinct lack of judgment. Those are not things that I would be doing. I would be here in the UK at the Treasury, having my hand firmly on the tiller and trying to instill confidence. And that is something clearly that she has chosen not to do. And that shows, in my opinion, the wrong decision to have taken.
All right, Mel Stride, thank you very much indeed for joining me this morning. I shall be asking former Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng, a man who knows a bit about resignation, who knows a bit about being under fire in office, whether he might take a position on Rachel Reeves's future. I only say this to politicians because if you're going to issue all of these criticisms of Labour as the opposition, when asked should she resign, I think it's a fair question that deserves a fair and straight answer. Doesn't it? Or am I losing my mind here? She's either good enough for the job and she can manage the economy, or she can't. Anyway, I'll ask Kwasi Kwarteng that in just a moment. Don't go anywhere. Still more fun to come on the Camilla Tominey Show today.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Figures released by the National Child Measurement Programme in 2024 found that almost 1 in 10 children was obese in the first year of school. Children living in deprived areas are twice as likely to be overweight as those in more affluent parts. Organisations like the Prepped Foundation are educating youngsters about healthy eating by giving them the skills to create balanced meals. TV chef James Golding has joined the foundation as the head of food education, and he joins me now to talk about the work. James, lovely to see you here.
Good to see you too. So Prepped used to be Table Talk Foundation, and it's now obviously Prep for Life, Prep for Knowledge. It's basically a charity to encourage kids to have a better understanding of food, but at the same time enjoy cooking and hopefully make better food choices in their life, as well as perhaps, you know, share the information we give them with their families.
Do you see them developing an understanding of the difference between healthy and unhealthy food?
Yes, I think that, you know, kids tend to sort of be taught a lot of this in school, but being able to actually ask questions to a chef and be able to cook with produce which they know is one, that is going to be tasty because they've tasted it, but two, open their eyes to food that they may not have tried before. I think that, you know, I think a lot of kids say they don't want to try stuff because they don't like the way it looks, but the way that we produce our sessions, we encourage the kids to try, and I think it really does open their eyes. It's very easy, I think, currently to be able to make easier choices, say fast food choices or that type of thing, and it's obviously giving people the ability to make the right choices, but also the skills to be able to do it. So I think it's something that needs to be addressed and something that really needs to be pushed, and that's what we're doing as a charity.
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Nana Akwe, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, though.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show, only on GB News. I'm joined now by the former Chancellor, Kwasi Kwarteng.
Hello.
You heard my interview with Mel Stride just there.
Yes, I did.
The opposition aren't great at opposition, are they? Well, look, if the Tories are going to send journalists like me, day in, day out, attack lines on how terrible Labour are at managing the economy, and I ask, therefore, should the Chancellor resign? The answer must surely be yes.
Well, not necessarily. I mean, I think that Mel did a reasonable job there. He's a friend of mine, just in the interest of
full disclosure. Look, he's a good guy, Mel, but come on.
He is a good guy. But actually what he said is that it's up to the Prime Minister. It's the Prime Minister who's responsible for this. We have this game where, and I was involved in that.
Yeah,
where it's
you
like,
resigned.
the Chancellor, well, I was sacked. I mean, let's be clear about it.
OK, you were sacked.
But then the problem with
yes.
that was that the actual policy is something that's often generally directed by number 10.
If you weren't sacked, would you have resigned?
If she goes, I probably would have done anyway. I mean, and she and Liz Truss, I think, lasted 6 days after she removed me from office. And that's the problem facing Sir Keir, because if he gets rid of Rachel Reeves, he was the one who said we were going to be the fastest growing country in the G7. He's the person who's been is the head of the government, and he's been saying, look, we're going to grow the economy. And the idea that, whatever she was doing wasn't totally sanctioned by him is for the birds. Of course they knew what was going to be in the budget. They both wanted to tax businesses. They both made the pledge not to tax working people. And we got into this absurd situation where farmers and small business owners were paying inheritance tax.
But you can surely
and they were raising taxes on corporations.
But you can surely take a position on, notwithstanding the Prime Minister and what the Prime Minister decides to do, and I get what you are saying, maybe it's an active sort of harry-carry to fire your own Chancellor. That's what happened. But she should consider her position.
Well, look,
because she's come into this talking about Liz Truss mini budgets and, oh my God, gilts and borrowing.
And it's going to get worse.
Exactly the same's happened.
Yes.
Taxes have gone up on people.
That's right.
No economist that I could find in my research yesterday seems to think that what the Labour government is doing is good economically for Britain.
No.
Like, I can't find anyone endorsing it, even on the left.
Well,
so her position must be tenuous.
Look, I'm not going to come here and say she should resign because, oppositions always play that game. I mean, I lost count of the number of times that Labour said, such and such a minister should resign.
Well,
and
that's my point to Mel Stride.
And they never did.
Labour did opposition a bit better, didn't they?
Well, they sort of did and they didn't. Because
did.
whenever they said, so-and-so must resign, that just meant, certainly in the Boris days, and I think with Rishi as well, the Prime Minister supported them more. Because if you say such and such a minister should resign and they leave, that's a win for the opposition. And so Prime Minister, he's more likely to back Rachel if we start calling for her resignation. That's just one of the weird things about politics.
Yeah. Why do you think this has all gone more wrong than when it went wrong with you?
So, look, I think there were two differences. I mean, firstly, with us, we did too much too quickly, and I've said this repeatedly, and the markets were spooked, and it was a huge immediate reaction to what they perceived to be unfunded tax cuts. In this situation, I think it's a worse situation because there's no easy way out. What happened with us was that Liz Truss sacked me And then they reversed some of the good policies, I thought, but they reversed all the policies in the mini budget. Where we are now is there's no end in sight. You've got a Labour government with a majority of 175, something in that region, and we have another election in 4 years' time, which is quite a long way away. And there's no inkling that they're going to reverse course or change their policy.
No.
So in the meantime, I think they're going to kill growth. I think what Mel said was 100% right. They've killed it stone dead. And the danger is that we'll be in a recession, God forbid. And if that happens, their only recourse will be to raise taxes even more, which will actually cause lower growth.
And
so
just
that's
explain
the doom
that,
loop.
because she has said that she doesn't want to renege on her fiscal rules, and she's also ruled out a return to austerity. So if you don't want to borrow more, God forbid, because they're already borrowing enough, and you don't want to cut spending, then there's only one solution, which is more taxes.
Squeezing more taxes. I mean, you remember Dennis Healey when he said, we'll squeeze, the lemon till the pips squeak. And they raised taxes to an extraordinary extent. The problem with that is that it kills growth even more.
Yes. Do you think we will enter recession this year?
I don't know. I mean, I think it'll be very much on the cusp. We might have a technical recession, which means 2 quarters of negative growth. We might avoid that.
Yeah.
But the bigger picture is that we're not actually growing the economy. Because in order to pay for the services that we have, the public services, we need growth at about 2%. That's the sort of rate you want to see.
It'd be nice if it was more than that. I mean, can't we look to the American example?
Of course. But if you don't get anywhere near 2%, you're in this doom loop where you have to keep raising taxes. No appetite on the Labour government to reduce spending. I mean, you can forget about that.
No.
And at the same time...
Don't worry, she's declared a war on waste.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean,
Do you have confidence in that?
No. I mean, that's always the last gasp when
I
they
did say
we're
that
going
myself
to get rid of...
So you don't quite know about recession.
I think it'll be on the cusp. It won't be. It's not as if we're going to get stellar growth. We're not going to get growth at 3%.
Will be so sclerotic
but it'll
and
be
low
exactly.
You could be in recession.
You could be one way or the other.
And then how about interest rates? Because obviously you are associated with interest rates going up massively after the mini budget. You've already taken responsibility for that. You even confessed to me on this show that your own mortgage had gone up. We've now got reports in the Telegraph and others saying mortgage costs could go up by £1,000 per homeowner. If interest rates go up, she really does have to consider her position, doesn't she?
I think the whole government will be in a very difficult place if interest rates go up.
Could they go up?
They could do. I mean, the issue that we have this year, it's a cusp, pivotal year for the government. As you asked me, will there be a recession or not? Everyone is asking that. Everybody in the city, everybody at home will be asking about, what's the future of the economy? And it's not very clear at the moment. If at the end of the year we've had zero growth or, God forbid, a recession, I think the whole government's plan is bust. They'll have to come back to the House of Commons and have a budget where they increase taxes even more, having said that they wouldn't do that. And I think at that point, the government's over, frankly.
But when government over? How can it be over? What would happen? How
it's credibility. I mean, we've got to wait till we got the
4 years is a long time.
We got the electoral cycle. I mean, I remember 92. I mean, it was obvious at the point of Black Wednesday that the government was dead.
And it lived on.
But it took 5 years. There was another 4.5 years before we had a general election.
Yeah.
But that's the sort of thing I think you're looking at. And I'm sure they will be very worried, even more worried than we are, frankly, about the economic prospects of the country, because their whole credibility will be hangs on this.
With everything that's gone on in recent weeks, doesn't she need to return to the House of Commons in the spring and deliver another budget then? Because she's flipped it and said she just wants to do spring statements and autumn budgets. We obviously had the autumn budget. It's now coming home to roost. She needs to recalibrate in a few months' time, not in over 6 months' time.
I think you're probably going to be right, but that will depend on what the GDP figures look like. The OBR at the time, and it seems like a million years ago, but it was only 3 or 4 months ago that the end of October budget happened, the autumn budget. And at that time, the OBR was predicting, I think, 2% growth for 2025. I think they'll have to revise that down. If that happens, that will create a black hole in terms of funding for public services. And I think at that moment, she'll have to come back to the House of Commons and announce further tax rises. That's what I think is going to happen. And it could happen as early as spring, as you say.
Did you think that the cease and desist letter from Liz Truss was a good idea to Keir Starmer?
I wouldn't have done it myself, because also I didn't really quite understand it, because if, in terms of parliamentary debate, no court in the land can legislate against that.
No, I mean, she doesn't want him blaming her, and
but if he says it on the floor of the House, that can just get repeated by other
Also, I didn't
outlets.
think it's quite in tune with her kind of like quest for freedom of speech and freedom of expression.
I don't know what's going on. I think it might be, you know, it keeps her in the public eye. We're talking about this. I don't know quite what's going on.
And also, can I just ask you about Britain's gas storage levels? When you were Chancellor, were you warned about...
Well, I was Energy Secretary as well.
Well, you were Energy Secretary, so tell me about it then, because we have this situation where obviously Britain is freezing, figuratively, literally, metaphorically and everything else. You've got Centrica warning we haven't got enough gas storage left, this idea that the lights might go out, and then you juxtapose that with Ed Miliband's net zero zealotry.
Sure.
What's your view on it?
So I think, look, I was broadly in favour of net zero when I was Energy Secretary. But I think you've got to adapt. You can say, look, we need the net zero target, but that can't be at the expense of people's quality of life, at the expense of their pocketbook. And I think we have to be much more flexible. The one thing I consistently opposed, even when we were doing it, was the energy windfall tax. Because essentially the danger is that we will tax the North Sea to extinction.
Yes.
And not only will the jobs go in that sector, you won't have the security of supply, you won't have the gas, you won't have people investing in those resources, which are British resources, to keep the lights on.
So should Miliband rethink that whole no issuing of new licences for new oil and gas drilling in the North Sea in light of recent events?
Yeah, I think all of that is driven by ideology and is totally unpragmatic. It's not serious. And I think it will just heap more costs on the people of Britain.
You're not painting a very positive picture for 2025.
Look, it's a difficult climate. I mean, I don't dispute that. I think the government has also, as Mel said, created a lot of these problems themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole tax system, the tax regime, that was something they introduced in October. Nobody forced them to do that. They just said that, right, we're going to put inheritance tax on farms, on small businesses. Yeah. We're going to put national insurance up on employers, which is essentially a jobs tax. And nobody forced them to do any of that. And then we're going to bake in higher costs with really sweetheart deals for train drivers. I just read this morning the train drivers are going to go on strike. And Labour said they were going to increase the pay in order to prevent the strikes. And that's what's happened. So they've created most of this mess themselves.
I know that's the irony about the public sector pay rises. Teachers, rail workers, they're still threatening strike action. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. They're still threatening strike action, even though they've got more money. Kwasi, we need to leave it there. Okay. Thank you very much indeed for your expertise. Coming up next, I'm going to take a lemsip, and we're going to be speaking to Lord Walney, who's the government advisor on political violence and disruption. I'm going to be discussing the grooming gang scandal with him. Don't go anywhere.
Hello there, very good morning to you. This is your GB News weather updates provided by the Met Office. Misty and murky start to the day for some of us. There is fog out there with light winds courtesy of high pressure. That does mean the fog could linger for a good while throughout today, particularly eastern areas of England, also Northern Ireland. Some quite dense fog patches around, so it is worth taking care if you are about to head out and travel at all. There will be, though, some sunny spells around once those fog areas do manage to clear off, particularly across parts of England and Wales. Temperatures, though, still a little below par for where we'd normally expect them to be for the time of year, particularly in the far southeast of England, struggling in places to get above much of 2-3 degrees Celsius. But further towards the west, we're starting to see the ingress of some southwesterly winds, and that is feeding in much milder conditions, so 8-9 degrees Celsius possible here. Those southwesterly winds, though, will really quite strengthen for the northwest of Scotland, particularly around the Outer Hebrides and in the Highlands. We could start to see some gales developing during the afternoon and evening period. We'll also see outbreaks of rain moving its way in across Scotland, parts of Northern Ireland as well, turning damper and wetter to end the day here. We will manage to stay dry across parts of England and Wales, but again, the odd fog patch is possible. We will lose the frost compared to some recent nights, so it will be milder for all of us, but still low single figures for parts of England. And again, once that fog does manage to clear its way off, it will be parts of central eastern areas of England that see the best chance of some sunshine throughout tomorrow as well. Further towards the north and west, though, some heavier outbreaks of rain swinging their way in, a much wetter day here. And those southwesterly winds still very persistent, so it is going to be a noticeably mild day for the time of year. Double-digit figures for Northern Ireland and Scotland, which could lead to some snow melt of the snow that has fallen over the last week or so. So potentially some surface water issues as that falls over the next few days to watch out for. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Britain.
Thank you for watching.
Thank you for listening.
Thanks for subscribing.
Thank you for your support.
It's you that make us the People's Channel.
As we reflect on our journey so far, we're filled with immense gratitude.
You mean the world to us. We couldn't have reached this point without you.
As a very special thank you, we are giving you the chance to win one of 50 GB News thank you boxes. They're worth £50 each.
For full terms and conditions, and to enter, just go to gbnews.com/thank you.
If you want your news to be straight talking,
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
down to earth,
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
and most importantly, honest,
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get the book thrown at them.
then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/your say. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family. Simply go to gbnews.com/your say.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey show. I do apologise about my coughing. I have had, like you probably have had, a cough for about 4 weeks now. Can't shift it. I'm hoping for brighter days ahead. I'm joined now by Lord Walney, who's the government's independent advisor on political violence and disruption. Lord Walney, lovely to see you this morning. I hope you're well and fine and dandy. Can we talk about Labour's continual resistance of a public inquiry into grooming gangs and child rape? Let's not gloss over it by just calling it grooming, because it was a lot more than that. Do you find it as surprising as I do? You know, we've got 3 in 4 Brits now, according to a recent survey, suggesting that they support it. Jess Phillips, the safeguarding minister, says, I'll listen to victims. We've had victims, they like to call themselves survivors, speak this week. I interviewed one called Gaia Cooper. She's calling for a public inquiry. Why are Labour resisting this?
I think they are genuinely resisting because they are fearful that you start a public statutory inquiry like this, and it seems like the answer. And I think we've got an issue that in the last week it's kind of crystallising into the sense that if you are serious about tackling these grooming and rape gangs, you're in favour of a public inquiry, and if you're not in favour, then you're not serious. And I don't think that's the case. The issue with these public inquiries is that they really genuinely can drag on. They can suck the whole of the life out of an issue. So look, I've got sympathy with ministers over not wanting to go down that, but I think it is really important that we are clear, the government is clear, politicians, us as a country, have a clearer answer to the central question that a lot of people watching this must be thinking, which is, does the UK have a serious problem with these rape and grooming gangs led by, are they led disproportionately, not exclusively, but disproportionately by men of Pakistani heritage preying on white girls and young women? I'm not clear at the moment what our answer to that is. If the answer to that is yes, then the conversation ought to go very quickly as to, well, what are we going to do about it? And that's where avoiding a public inquiry could actually speed up action. If the answer is no, well, I think that will run counter to what a lot of people looking at this are thinking. But it's really important that if that is actually statistically a myth, then we all, the government, ministers, institutions, need to be out there showing actually why that perception is a myth. And Camilla, if the answer is we're not sure and we don't have sufficient evidence to understand it, then clearly more examination is urgently needed. That may not be in the form of a public statutory inquiry, but we have to place a greater focus on that.
I mean, when I spoke to a survivor in the week, she said, look, we know how many people were killed in Grenfell. We know how many people were killed in Hillsborough. We now have a full understanding of what happened with the post office scandal. What we don't know is how many people were groomed and raped, who all the perpetrators were, and whether in some cases there has been a cover-up. And I think that's quite a legitimate, those are legitimate questions to be asked in this kind of situation when you're talking about minors. The other thing that we do need to address, and even if it was in comparatively to the whole situation with child rape, sexual exploitation and abuse in this country, was there a racially aggravated nature to the crimes that were perpetrated by largely Pakistani men? Was there a sense that these Muslim men were racially aggravated in their assaults on young white girls? That's something we have to explore.
It's incredibly serious, and it is potentially a fault line in our politics, in the kind of community like I represented in Bowen-on-Furness when I was in the House of Commons, in communities that have had the appalling atrocity of girls being raped and groomed in this way. Of course, that is a position, that is a question of central importance, and people are going to be contemptuous of anyone who feels that that question can't be asked for fear of offending or whatever well-meaning but misplaced reasons that happened. I think back really clearly, actually, to just after I came into the House of Commons. I came in 2010. And in 2011, you had Jack Straw, who, remember, was a towering figure in the last New Labour government. He was Foreign Secretary, and he was also a former Home Secretary. And he was back on the backbenches by then. But he came, he did what was an explosive interview at the time, talking about this problem and saying that, unfortunately, horrifically, some men of Pakistani heritage in the kind of community like Blackburn, where he represented, thought that really were dismissive entirely of white non-Muslim girls and saw them as meat. Now, that caused a storm at the time, and people were highly critical. But actually, 14 years later, we're back at that point, and there have been, tragically, appallingly, much abuse since. And the public will just not allow us the sense of political classes, of people in authority not facing up to this. In maybe in past decades, there was a sense sometimes of politicians say, well, look, this is really difficult. Let's focus on the economy. Let's focus on making people's lives economically better, because this is in the too difficult to handle. Right, as your program has explored this morning, actually, people's faith in politicians to sort out the economy is kind of, let's hope it's rock bottom, because let's hope it doesn't get any lower than this. So we're at a really dangerous moment in our politics, and it is incumbent on politicians in the mainstream of all stripes to seriously and properly look at this issue and face up to it.
All that, although I'm just going to make one point, and maybe it seems facile to make it party political, but I think part of the criticism here has been that it was largely voices on the left who started shouting racist at people who tried to expose these grooming gangs. Now, it may well have been because some of those figures are associated with the hard right, Tommy Robinson and others. You know, GBNews was criticised by some liberal elitists for all of Charlie Peters' work on this. We had Labour MPs who were brave enough to put their heads above the parapet. I'm thinking about Anne Cryer. I'm thinking about Sarah Champion. I'm thinking about Simon Danczuk. OK, these northern constituencies, they're represented largely by Labour MPs, some of whom turned a blind eye. Sean Davies didn't want an investigation in Telford. He's now the MP for Telford. So this reflects worse, I think, I'm sorry to make it party political, on the left than it does the right.
Well, I mean, what happened to Sarah Champion in particular was appalling. The fact that she used really plain language, and she wrote it in the Sun back in 2016 when Jeremy Corbyn was the leader of the Labour Party about this problem, and she got castigated by it, and she ended up having to resign her position and hasn't been back on the front bench since. Look, I think that is a fair charge to make, that certainly in recent years, the left, not particularly necessarily specifically the Labour Party, but the centre and the left have, for understandable, for well-meaning reasons, have been very reluctant to go there. But the effect on, if there is any individual who has ended up suffering more at the hands of these evil men than was otherwise the case, that is inexcusable. And on a wider scale, it has created a corrosive environment. There is nothing. There is nothing antithetical to being left-wing and calling out this kind of abuse and equality. And where there are cultural underpinnings, being very forceful about the kind of country we live in, the values that we uphold, and saying that any culture that comes in that challenges that has no place.
Lord Walmley, we need to leave it there, but thank you very much indeed for your time this morning. Thank you. Well, coming up next, we're going to be discussing the inauguration of President-elect Trump, which is fast approaching, and also reflecting on the devastating wildfires in Los Angeles with Jennifer Ewing, who's a member of the Republican Overseas Group. But first, here's the weather.
I forecast a perfect holiday in the sun.
Weather looking good then?
For sure, and no worries about our travel insurance.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations forecast.
If you're about to jet off to the Mediterranean for some winter sun, then west is certainly best at this time. It's high pressure that's in charge across parts of Iberia into southern France to provide relatively fine conditions at the moment, but further towards Italy and around the Adriatic towards Turkey as well, we've currently got some heavy rain, even heavy snowfall across inland areas. This will be continuing over the next couple of days or so, but is expected to ease during the forthcoming week.
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors GB News Travel Destinations forecast.
Good Afternoon Britain isn't just about us. The wonderful thing about this programme is it's about everyone watching. It's an interactive programme.
Well, there absolutely is something to see here, and we're going to be talking about it more.
Whether it's breaking royal news,
Will, please bring us up to date.
or indeed a particularly punchy speech in the House of Commons,
Very, very curious.
we bring it to you live, and then we bring you live reaction as well.
That's Good Afternoon Britain, weekdays from midday.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Now, in the first Film Awards ceremony of the season, the Golden Globes 2025, we need to get used to that, commenced overnight.
Stephanie Tetchy to talk about all of this.
Good morning.
Morning.
Well, we know the Oscars are like the creme de la creme of film award shows, but it's the Golden Globes which sets the trend, because who we see picking up on the Golden Globes, we tend to see picking up at the BAFTAs, at the Oscars. So last night was a good indicator of what's to come. I would say it was a big year for musicals. We've had this film, Emilia Perez, starring Selena Gomez, Zoe Saldana. It's about a Mexican drug cartel who changes gender, and it's an operatic musical. So the plot sounds crazy, and in fact, it's a musical as well. It was a big night for Demi Moore.
Oh, I love
At the
her.
age of 62, she's just picked up her first film award for The Substance, Best
Well done
Actress.
to her.
It's an amazing film. Ellie, I know you're a big fan of Wicked.
Yes, I watched it for the second time yesterday.
I think I'm about to watch it for the third time because it's that great. Last week, it eclipsed Mamma Mia to become the highest-grossing film for a Broadway musical. Unfortunately, it wasn't a big night for their acting, including Ariana Grande and Cynthia Erivo. They totally got snubbed for awards, but it did win Best Cinematic and Box Office Achievement Prize. It was a big night for the Brits. Baby Reindeer, Richard Gadd, he picked up for the Best Limited Drama Series.
I'm surprised at that because Baby Reindeer's a bit dark.
That's a lot of people ask him, how has this film got so much success when it's based on a dark plot? And he says, you know what, it's basically human life.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect, and then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. With me now is Republicans' overseas spokesman, Jennifer Ewing. Lovely to see you, Jennifer. Before we get on to Trump's inauguration, you recently were in California. You're from California, in fact. What do you make of the wildfires? Because we're now getting into the blame game. Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass has copped a lot of criticism, as has the state governor, Gavin Newsom. Do you think that there's a role that's been played in all this by sort of Democrat-led wokery?
For sure. I mean, I guess the first thing to say is it's just a tragedy all around. You know, I mean, over 100,000 people have been evacuated. I personally know people who lost everything. You know, they walked out and entire homes. The death toll, I believe, at last count was 16.
Yeah.
I think 16 or 13 people are missing as well. So I'm sure those numbers will go up. So it's a huge tragedy. Now, obviously, you don't want to jump on the political game. However, if you live in California and you know how things work there, there's a lot of inefficiencies because of, you know, as you just said, woke policies or a very, very strong, like, environmental protection agency.
Yeah.
So one of the things that that used to be done is these controlled burnings,
Yes.
right? So
Get rid of the deadwood.
Exactly that. And because of a rare beetle or some rare little creature, they've said we can no longer do that, right? The other problem is I'm from Northern California, which is obviously north of Southern California where Pacific Palisades is, and we get a lot more rain, we get a lot more water, and for a variety of reasons, including some fish called the smelt, we are not sending a lot of the water down south.
I read this today. This seems extraordinary because although we worry about little fish, we probably worry more about human beings and their properties.
We do. And I'm sure you've read the stories, some of these fire hydrants were empty. They just simply weren't working. We've not used reservoirs properly. And the drought's been over, you know, for a few years. So I was amazed at how green everything was. It was beautiful.
Do you think Newsom's days might be numbered over this? Because he had a huge amount, ironically, of celebrity support in Hollywood and some of these areas affected.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think people are going to have to learn, rather than just voting down ballot for for Democrats, because you don't like Trump or you think you're this wonderful liberal, you're going to have to start looking, does this person do a good job? You know, like when we are looking for a mechanic or somebody to work on our house or our plumbing, we don't care what their politics are.
No.
We care, are they competent?
Can they run? Can they run the state and the country?
Incredible incompetence.
Time is fast running away with us here. So let's get on to Trump and the inauguration.
Sure.
How different do you think the second Trump presidency is going to be to the first? You know, he seems to be sort of fattening out the front bench. It's not all about Trump now. We've got big figures like RFK Jr. involved as health secretary. We've also got the Elon Musk alliance, which is interesting in itself. How's it shaping up?
Yeah. Okay. So the first thing I noticed, and I noticed this in California, which is, pretty much a blue state, quite left-leaning, is he definitely has a mandate this time.
Yeah.
There's no questioning like there was in 2016. Oh, he wasn't a legitimate president. People, even who didn't vote for him, will say he won fair and square. So that's number one. That's going to help him. Number two, rather than take the advice of a lot of Washington insiders as to who he should place in these positions, he's choosing a wide variety of other people, a lot of them Democrats. You just mentioned Bobby Kennedy Jr. was a former Democrat. Tulsi Gabbard was a former Democrat. God, Trump was a Democrat not too long ago. So you're getting a lot of people who have wonderful business experience, wonderful experience, and have been quite successful, rather than just these Washington full-time politicians. So that's going to be great. I think he is, I don't want to say, he's not had a personality change, but you could see even his campaign. He was funnier. He was lighter. He wasn't using a lot of the same sort of nasty tactics. The other thing is, and it'll be such a relief, especially after the Biden-Harris administration, he's completely accessible. He will talk to anyone. He'll talk to friendly media. He'll talk to hostile media. He'll talk to young podcasters. He'll talk to, the big shows. So I think people are really going to appreciate that. Gave a wonderful press conference the other day, and he'll just be very open about what he has planned.
We've run out of time.
Of course.
Jennifer, a one-word answer to this question. Who will be the conduit to Trump, Mandelson or Farage?
Definitely Farage, not Mandelson, or maybe Mark Burnett, who's the special envoy.
All right, Jennifer Ewing, thank you very much indeed. Up next, it's Michael Portillo. Stay tuned to GB News. I'll see you again next Sunday.
We'll see a cold snap, which will quickly develop into a warm front. Boxed Boiler Repairs, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, this is your latest GB News weather updates provided by the Met Office. It's a misty start for some of us where we do have fog patches in play, particularly across eastern areas of England where high pressure is in charge at the moment, which means we've got light winds, so there's not much action to really help clear that fog out of the way. Elsewhere across parts of England and Wales, there will be some sunny spells in there to enjoy today, but it is going to be another cold feeling day across those southern and eastern parts. Temperatures